My point is you have to save the outrage, genuinely outrageous things. Otherwise, we all get fed up with the outrage.
But we're comparing him to Hitler.
You know what it's like to go to sleep every night knowing you work for a bunch of psychotic killers?
So let me go ahead and eviscerate this mouth diarrhea for you sentence by sentence.
Get off my phone!
Decency. Decency. Decency.
Need a break from the shouting? You've just found it. A haven from the noise. A safe space for ideas that aren't welcome in safe spaces. A game of chess in a world of socio-political rugby. You're listening to The Right Moment.
Ever get tired of the outrage? I mean, does anyone do anything besides scream and shout and chant and threaten anymore? It doesn't matter if you're on the left or on the right or somewhere in the middle or deep in the outfield with people who believe that Wi-Fi causes cancer and Obama was a Muslim. If you take a position on, well, pretty much anything, you're probably going to get a bunch of outrage flung in your face rather than a reasonable discussion of what's wrong and how it can be fixed. Hello and welcome to The Right Moment. I am your host, Des Moines Register columnist, socially maladjusted homeschooler, and overall logic enthusiast, Joel Kurtinitis. Yeah, my last name does sound like a disease. No, you are not the first person to make that joke. Actually, to be medically accurate, itis denotes an inflammation, which is a tad ironic because one of my goals in starting this podcast is to become something of an anti-inflammatory agent in mainstream political dialogue, and that's a tricky thing to do these days. You know, we all talk about the fact that everyone seems so angry and most of America can't seem to express an opinion without caps lock and a dozen exclamation points. But at some point, you have to ask yourself why that's the norm. I mean, why do political commentators continue to replace facts with snark and logic with emotion? Because it sells, right? I mean, we're a nation that's open to outrage. We're not looking for who's more convincing. We're looking for who sounds more genuine or more sincere or more passionate, even if they're passionate about nonsense, which, face it, a lot of people are. So because there's a big market for outrage, both sides of the political aisle, everybody's offended. Everybody's terrified. Everybody thinks someone is coming for their guns or their health care or their kids. And it just creates an environment where you can't have a balanced opinion on anything. You can't just wait for the facts. You can't have an uninvested discussion about anything. And that has consequences. I mean, one of the consequences is what we're seeing all around us, what we saw in Charlottesville a while ago. People get fearful, people get violent. It reminds me of Agent K in Men in Black when he said, "A person can be smart, but people are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals." It's true. I mean, when faced with a threat, be it political or social or physical, most of us just react. But the other consequence, which I think is just as hazardous and actually feeds the first, is this. When you constantly crank it to 11 with the rhetoric, good people just check out. You can't live in a state of high alert all the time. You can't ever really have peace if you think people are on their way to take everything you hold dear. You just run out of energy. You burn out. You start realizing there's a whole lot of life outside of politics where people just grill out and talk sports and have fun. And that's just as much of a rot to democracy as open hate in the streets. Because when good people stop caring, it's those people rioting in the streets who rule. So I'm going to make you a deal. Here at The Right Moment, we're going to do better than just reacting. Hot takes are cheap and unstructured and unsupported opinions, and they belong on Twitter, not in any serious discussion of things that matter, whether it's culture or politics or money or faith. So that's my part of the deal. Here's yours. I don't want you to take anything I say on the merit of me saying it. If you come away from this program agreeing with everything I say up front, I'm not going to say I've failed, but I'll say I think you may be investing more in the conclusions than the process, and that's something I want to reverse. I'm a process guy. I've always been a process guy. If your process isn't sound, your conclusions are going to be suspect. If your process is sound, your conclusions can still be wrong, but they're a lot easier to diagnose and fix. You know what I mean? So I can be wrong. I have been wrong. I've spoken out of turn. I've changed my mind in accordance with new evidence, and that's actually something I find to be honorable, not shameful. I'm sure there'll be times where I say something hasty or uncalculated or unproven or unhelpful. And that's when it becomes really important that you're listening thoughtfully and critically. See, contrary to what you may have heard on conservative talk radio since, about 1990, talk show hosts aren't infallible, and saying dumb things louder doesn't make them any less dumb. So I hope you're challenged. I hope you learned something. But most of all, I hope you'll take the time to research, decipher, and challenge what I say for all of our sakes. Let's think, let's reason together, let's do some talking and some listening, and who knows, maybe we can pull this country back. But you don't pull your country back without pulling your state back. You don't pull your state back without pulling your city back, and you don't pull your city back without pulling your neighbor back. So let's be neighbors today, you and I, and let's see where we can agree, where we can disagree, and where we can learn. And I don't say any of that in some ridiculous kumbaya fashion. Look, I know things are coming apart. I know Americans are at each other's throats more than perhaps any time since the Civil War. I know we're $20 trillion in debt. I know we're saber-rattling against a nuclear power. I know people are hurting from a lack of healthcare, a lack of jobs, and maybe more than anything, just a lack of decency. I know the country's in crisis, but times of crisis are the absolute worst times to be reactionary. Times of crisis are when people and nations need clarity and forethought, not blind partisanship. But hey, since I'm asking you to make a deal with me, maybe I better introduce myself a little more completely and let you know where I'm coming from. And I'll do that right after this break. Stay tuned. You're listening to The Right Moment. Welcome back to The Right Moment. I am your host, Joel Kurtinitis, but you don't know what that means, do you? So let me give you a little bit of information about myself and my background and let you know where I'm coming from and what you can, the perspective that you can expect to hear on this program. So first of all, let me get this out of the gate. I'm a millennial. Go ahead, bring on the hate. I can take it. You know, millennials get a lot of crap, but we are not the ones who racked up $20 trillion in national debt and got into a bunch of useless foreign wars. I mean, for what it's worth, we didn't get into those things. We got our own issues, but those are not some of them. I grew up in the Deep South, in peanut country, up in the Florida Panhandle. In fact, people ask me where I grew up, and I always refer to the Alan Jackson song "Way Down Yonder on the Chattahoochee." Like that pretty much describes right where I grew up. I was raised in a Christian home, a home that cared a lot about freedom, and really only cared about politics in as much as political involvement was a means of protecting that freedom. One of the first books I remember my parents reading to me as a kid was The Plymouth Settlement by William Bradford. If you're not familiar with books in the 1600s, it's not easy reading, let's put it that way. There's single sentences that will sometimes go like most of an entire page. That's just the way they wrote. They had better vocabularies, and they knew how to use all the punctuation points the way that they should. So it was a rigorous homeschooling curriculum that we had in the early days there, and I got a deep respect for the Constitution, for the founding of the United States, for the ideals of classic liberalism, of freedom, of federalism, of all the principles that turned America into the greatest engine of success the world has ever seen. Despite some of the issues that we face now, I still believe it is. I was a first-generation homeschooler, and what I mean by that is that when I was homeschooled, it had only just become legal in Florida to educate your children at home. And so we sort of broke ground on that, and now homeschooling has become increasingly popular on the left and the right. There's people pulling their kids out of school really not for any sort of religious or moral reasons, just as much as they see the government-funded education system failing, and we keep throwing money at it, but it keeps failing. So my perspective on all things education is going to admittedly be with a bias towards private education, towards homeschooling. I have seen that work. The statistics are overwhelming. It does work, and that's a background that I'm privileged to have. As a teenager, we moved to the political epicenter of the United States, that is Iowa, at least once every 4 years. And my first job in politics was as a regional director for Ron Paul. Again, you can go ahead and bring on that hate. I love liberty. I love Ron Paul. I love the Constitution. And I am that guy on the YouTube bot that sits there and just repeats liberty, Constitution, Ron Paul. Yeah, that's me. Those are things that I care about. And there's a lot of things that Ron talked about that I think we've lost sight of, and a lot of things that have been lost in the political dialogue that he brought to the table that were very important. And so while I don't describe myself as a libertarian, I really am impressed with Ron. I'm impressed with a lot of the things he brought forward, and have been a part of his liberty movement for a long time. And I think we embrace a lot of the same principles there. I deeply respect the man. I was then elected to the Republican State Central Committee as part of my activism with Ron Paul and his campaign. I served there for 2 absolutely wild years where we fought the political establishment. We tried to refocus the party on the grassroots and ultimately learned just so much about parties and how they work and why they've stopped working for America. Then in 2016, I ended up getting behind Ted Cruz. I was involved with Libertarians for Cruz. As I said, I'm not a big L libertarian, but I do have a lot of background within the liberty movement and share enough of the principles there that I decided to get involved with that effort. I think that Cruz was a good choice for libertarians. I think that effectively, even though he had some policy flaws as well, effectively he certainly would have pursued things that are much better to the libertarian agenda than what we're seeing now. At that time, I started writing for The Blaze, several other online publications, and then after some time of writing opinion articles for them, I began writing for the Des Moines Register as a regular opinion columnist. Most recently, I got involved in refounding and reforming the Federalist Party. And the question, if you are paying attention to the background that I have there, the obvious question that comes from that is why. If you are someone who has been involved in Republican Party politics for a time, who has run through conventions and been sort of on the inner circle of party politics, why would you ditch that and go toward a third party effort after all the years of people saying third parties are futile? The answer to that is a little bit complex. So in 2012, I was the guy that was working within the Republican Party. I bought into the Ron and Rand philosophy, which was we should reform the GOP from the inside. I wanted to take the principles of the founding. I wanted to take the principles of liberty and Austrian economics and decentralized government. I wanted to put those into practice, and I thought the best way to do that was through the Republican Party. Well, a lot of folks disagreed with that. They wanted to, vote Libertarian or Constitution Party, go one of those routes. And at the time, I was the one who was calling them back from the edge, saying, hey, let's not do this. Let's stick with what we know. Third parties have never worked. They are statistically improbable. It's statistically improbable that they're going to start working now. So I was one who was pulling people back from that actively and kept my efforts within the Republican Party, working within some PACs and nonprofits, things like that, trying to kind of turn the party towards conservatism from the inside. But in the 2016 cycle, as that kicked off, and of course the fire is always lit first here in Iowa. We're first in the nation caucuses, and before anybody else has to deal with the political circus, we have to deal with it here. And part of the way through that cycle, I really started seeing a discouraging change within the GOP. I wanted to say that we had made progress. We had Ron did really well in 2012. You had people like Cruz and Lee and Rand Paul in the Senate who were just striking blows for liberty. They're going to bat for constitutional rights, holding the Senate's feet to the fire, shutting down the government. There's a lot of encouraging things going on at that time. But what I started to see is that it didn't really change the culture of the Republican Party. And I attribute part of that acknowledgement to my time within the Republican Party, where you come to find out that most of what the Republican Party does, and most of what the Democrat Party does too, since there's no competition, they really take the voters and the grassroots for granted. They don't need you. I mean, let's be honest. They have put legal walls around themselves all over America that makes it impossible for anyone else to legitimately compete. Not impossible. I'll get to that. Difficult for anyone else to legitimately compete. And they have insulated themselves to the point where they can funnel power up from the people, the voters, the donors, the activists, to a handful of people that are up at the top who continue to make the plays, make the calls, decide how the system's going to be run, who they're going to cozy up to, what deals they're going to cut. These are all things that are determined by the party establishments, and that's what I was going up against. And at some point, you have to step back from that and realize it's not a flaw with the people that are in charge of it. It's a systemic flaw that you're up against. I think that, if you want to look at it from the left's perspective, Bernie Sanders voters found this out firsthand. I mean, they got absolutely robbed. If you're a Bernie Sanders voter out there, I feel more sorry for you than anyone else as a result of the 2016 election. You guys got hosed. The political establishment was firmly on the side of Hillary Clinton. They would have done anything to make sure that she got it, and they did. They really just burned you guys fiercely. So that's kind of an example of the way that parties are structurally able to be easily manipulated. And so I looked at that and I said, I think that the time has come to reevaluate what a party should do, what a party should be. The other critical factor in this is that very few people care or even know how a party works anymore. As again, as a millennial, as a husband and a dad and a full-time job, I don't have a lot of time. I mean, I try to keep up with politics, but I don't have time to go to all-day conventions. I don't have time to go to, RNC conferences all over the country. I don't have time to go to CPAC. These are things that require a bunch of time and money and effort. And the average people that are caring about the policies that get passed in America, they don't want to do that. They don't have time for that. They've got yards to mow. They've got kids to take to different projects. They've got things to do. There's no reason for them to invest this much time and effort in a political process, particularly one that doesn't pay off in their favor. And that's where we can swing this to the right side and see, look at all the activism that went into the Tea Party. Look at all of the activism that was poured into Republican primaries, try to knock out establishment candidates. And where has it gotten us? Where have we gotten with this? We've elected some great people to Congress, to the Senate, nationally. We've taken a ton of states. The Republican Party has complete control in, I think, 35 states now, 35, 37, something like that. And where's it getting us? Obamacare is still in place. And especially from a Trump voter's perspective, right? Obamacare is still in place. There is no wall. Tax code hasn't been reformed. I mean, there's really not that much to be excited about. Now, when the roles were reversed and the Democrats were in power, they just ran roughshod all over us, right? I mean, they did whatever they wanted. Obama got whatever he wanted. He had complete control of Congress, and he got whatever he wanted. He passed through signature legislation. He completely overhauled our foreign policy. He changed our immigration policy. He did a bunch of things that we disagreed with, and there was nothing we could do to stop him. Now that the roles are reversed, we have a president who is cutting deals with the opposition party because he finds it too difficult to negotiate with his own, which is quite a statement for a guy that ran on his negotiation prowess, right? But anyway, I think it's time to reevaluate, and part of the way through last cycle, I started to become of the idea that maybe the time has come that we should look into a third party. And it was only just an idea that I was entertaining, more out of curiosity than anything else for starters. But looking at the trend between 2012 and 2016, not a lot of people know this, but third-party voting actually has exploded over the last two cycles. We didn't have a third-party candidate anywhere near the popularity of, say, a Ralph Nader. But third-party voting was actually up 300% between 2008 and 2012, and 800% between 2008 and 2016. That is a trend. And I think it's a trend that's going to continue to increase for one very important reason. Younger voters, millennial voters, and the next generation that's coming up was Generation Z, I think. We want options. I mean, how hard is that to understand? I got a cell phone here in my pocket that's got a million options on everything. There's just everything. Every choice in the world is available to me on an app in my pocket. But when it comes to politics, it's dreadful. I have two choices, neither of which I like at all. And there is no efficiency. There is no personalization. There is no customization. And there's definitely no concern at all for technology. I mean, how many of you have been to a Republican or Democrat Party website? How horrible are those? I mean, it's terrible. Every year, when I was within party leadership and as I've been active within Republican Party politics, every year, everyone talked about, hey, we've got to get better with technology. We got to win millennial voters. We've got to bring them in. They like technology, so we like technology. But it never gets any better. They don't know how to use technology. They didn't grow up with this. This is an older generation trying to impose a party system that doesn't work anymore on a younger generation. So I think it's time for something new. Millennials are now the largest voting bloc in America. We have grown up with cell phones and computers. We know what it's like to give feedback on the fly. We know what it's like to rate people between 1 and 5 stars and leave a comment if you feel strongly. These are things that should be applied to politics. I mean, why is that revolutionary? Why is that controversial? We're in the internet age. We're innovative. We are looking for appified, object-oriented solutions to everything. So why wouldn't we apply that to a political party? Why can't we raise another party to prominence? Why can't we raise more parties in general to prominence so that we have more options? I think this is the way that the future is going to go, and I think that there has been a turning point in America, and it was inevitable. I mean, people are discouraged with Congress, with the president, with politicians in general, with the media, and there has to be an outlet for that. So that the reasonable step when you become discouraged and disillusioned with all these things, there's two possible steps, right? One is to withdraw completely and go back to just real America, where people, talk about sports and have fun and don't worry about politics. And the other is to innovate, is to come up with something better, something new, the way that generations before us have, and try to improve what we were given. I think there's an opportunity to do this within the party system in America. Because parties, people talk about parties being useless, but I don't think they are. I think parties have lost their way. There is a legitimate purpose to parties. It's to organize the impact of voters and activists into winning elections. And as long as we have an electoral system here, a democratic electoral system, it's going to have to be that way. You're going to have to organize people. Or you're going to have a ridiculous amount of faith in a government organization to do it for you, which I don't find that to be particularly impressive, because whoever's in charge is going to run the elections and run the voting. So I think that a party needs to, our idea of a party needs to be reformed. And I think we can do that by offering some technological solutions, by encouraging people to stay involved. I mean, look, there is a ton of political activism out there. And you know how I know? I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. I watch YouTube. I mean, there's a ton of activism out there. Everybody has strong opinions on these things. You got people marching in the streets calling Trump a fascist, and I can't entirely disagree from a dictionary definition, but at the same time, I think if you were to take that literally, a lot of U.S. politicians could be considered fascists on any given time, especially economically. But there's a ton of energy out there. There's a ton of activism, tons of independents who care greatly about freedom, who care about equal rights, who care about civil rights, who care about keeping their paychecks, who care about making money, creating wealth, creating jobs, creating happiness. And they express those opinions, unfortunately, most of the time in the most useless way, which is social media. Now, social media has amazing benefits. Love it. Want to see it implemented everywhere. But it also has very strong limitations. And those limitations are that they don't get people elected. Social media alone only gets people elected if it drives them to action. And so to that point, we need to use it, but it needs to be more than that. And I think that you can take the social media experience that we have grown up with as millennials and apply that to electoral politics. I think that you can take that and turn it into an app where you can give party platform suggestions. I think that you can turn that into all kinds of things that will make people want to be engaged, that will bring that political power to their pockets. I don't think it's hard to do. There's a market there. We can do this. Now, as for where you go with that, that's why a third party, I think, is necessary, because the two parties we have now have failed, and they are failing. So why the Federalist Party in particular? We'll talk about that right after this. You're listening to The Right Moment. Hi, welcome back to The Right Moment. I am your host, Joel Kurtinitis, and boy, last segment we talked about why to go to a third party, why shift from the Republican-Democrat binary choice to a third party. This time, let's talk a little bit about why the Federalist Party. There's a bunch of other parties out there, right? So why not take one of those? Well, truth be told, I actually explored that option in 2016. A lot of good folks over in the Libertarian Party, and of course, I'm a Ron Paul guy, so I have a lot in common with a lot of Libertarian folks. I like a lot of the philosophies there. I have a couple issues with it. That's not something I'll get into right now, but overall, the Libertarian Party, I think, is probably the next best option out there. So I looked into it, but you know what? The Libertarian Party has two real problems. One, philosophically, they don't know where they want to be. And what I mean by that is that they have some ideological struggles within the party that they're still trying to resolve. For instance, some of them are more left-leaning social justice warrior types. Some of them really oppose that on free market and free association grounds. There's a growing pro-life segment within the party, but the majority of the Libertarian Party and their structure is still pro-choice, and the party platform makes it clear that they support abortion, and that's going to be an irreconcilable difference over the long run that they are going to have a difficult time settling. The other problem that the Libertarian Party has is that they, like pretty much every other third party, have chosen to take a top-down approach to challenging the two-party system. And basically, my term for it is the suicide candidates that they throw up every 4 years, that they decide to run against whoever's running for president from the two major parties. They decide to take a long shot with it, throw up a Gary Johnson or a Darrell Castle or somebody along those lines, and then pour all of their energy and focus and effort into that race and then see how far it gets them, and then wait another 4 years and do it again. They get slaughtered every time. They have yet to make it onto a national debate stage. They're just it's not getting anywhere, and they've had this track record of failing in this way for about 40 years now. It's been a long time. So I think we need to look for a new approach on that. And if you're coming at this from a third party perspective, you have to look honestly and say that third parties as they exist now are not working, and there is room for a third party to come along with a different philosophy, start local, start bottom up, and start to build that momentum in a way that shows people that they're legitimate, shows people that they're not sacrificing their energy and resources and money to a lost cause, and show that a real challenge can be mounted to the system as we know it. Now, that's if you're looking at it from a third-party perspective. There's also benefits to the Federalist Party from the left and from the right. So let's look at those real quickly. So from the left, if you are looking at the Federalist Party from the left, it should be appealing to you just on the basis that it really is a founding fathers style #resist. So if you're worried about a federal government that has become increasingly powerful over the last couple decades because each president, regardless of party, keeps building up the executive, keeps diminishing the role of Congress and the states, and keeps centralizing power with that one person, the president, then federalism is the answer that you're looking for. Federalism means that you can resist the president, you can resist the federal government by means of the states. You use the 10th Amendment to create a space of independence for your own state to be able to be that laboratory of democracy that it's meant to be. There's a great example of this. Colorado has legalized marijuana, recreational marijuana, and it's in defiance of current federal drug law. So, I mean, the federal government could choose to crack down on these states using the supremacy clause or whatever justification they wanted. But the states took the initiative, said, no, we're going to legalize this. We're going to move forward with it. So they legalized it. They're trying it out as a state. They're going to see how the consequences work out. But they have a right to do that. And a Federalist Party will protect that right to do that. The Federalist Party is going to say, hey, if I'm a Federalist in New York, I might be great with free tuition for college and higher tax rates. That's totally cool. My state can do that. If I'm a Federalist in Texas, I'm okay with very loose gun laws. And neither of those have to interfere or impose on the other states. I mean, that's kind of the point. Where this tension around America and this being at each other's throats all the time. There are several ways this can work out. Most of them are not pretty. Okay, none of us want to see another civil war in our lifetimes. So the alternative to that is to develop these individual packets of liberty, develop these states into what they were meant to be, and within the states, smaller packets of liberty, right? I mean, we're in Iowa right now, where our Republican legislature just this last year passed a preemption bill, basically telling all the cities and localities in Iowa, no, you're going to do what we want. You're not going to raise your minimum wages locally. You're not going to pass business restrictions locally without our approval. And that's not right. I mean, federalism extends to the city level too. If you're in that city, you care more about that city. If you live in Des Moines, you care more about Des Moines than people across the rest of the state do. If you live in whatever city or community you live in, you have a right to have different policies in that city than in the city next to you. That's representative government. That's what it's meant to be. And that applies equally to liberals and conservatives. If you're a liberal, you need federalism. Because when you're up against red legislatures and a red president and a red Congress, you're going to need that. Now, from the right, here's the perspective where I feel like I can speak to it more closely just because this is the perspective that I'm coming from. Looking at the 2016 election, going into it as a Republican loyalist, in a sense of that word, the math has to change. There are not enough constitutionalists to drive policy forward, to drive elections forward. We're not, with the trend that it is as it is right now. There will have to be wholesale cultural changes in the United States before we're going to see 50% plus one of the population voting to elect a constitutionalist. It's just not there anymore. And if you look at the voting trends with younger people, particularly on traditionally conservative issues, socially conservative issues, I'll say, there are encouraging areas, but overall the trend is away from us. And so if you're a socially conservative, a religious right voter, you're not going to get to 50% plus one again. It's not going to happen. The days of the religious right winning national elections are, I won't say they're entirely over, but they are certainly in their sunset. So we have to change the math. If you care about the Constitution and preserving liberty, you have to change the math. You can't end up in a position where, like we did this last cycle, where you've got a protectionist liberal on one side and a globalist liberal on the other side, or you really have no voice. So what we have right now is a situation where you already do have three major parties in American government. You've got the left, the right, and the center. It's just that one of those doesn't have a voice at the moment. We've got centrists in both parties trying to slug it out for control of each party that they try to represent. And in some cases they win, in some cases they lose. But the point is, there's a greater comfort factor when you're dealing with your own. Do you think Rand Paul and Ted Cruz and John McCain prefer being in the same party? I mean, these are people that oppose each other at every turn, call each other names. They can't stand each other. They are deliberate foils to each other and in their plans. I mean, I don't know if anybody saw the failed ACA repeal vote where John McCain came in and got everyone's attention and then gave his dramatic thumbs down. I mean, he cherishes that. The guy loves it. He loves getting in the way of conservatives trying to do something within the GOP. So let's change the math on that. And when I say change the math, here's what we do. So right now, and obviously there's going to have to be structural electoral changes to deal with the White House in the long run, because White House is the presidency is 50%. You have to have a majority of the electoral college. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but there's a ton of other races and elections in America where that is not the case, where you have plurality voting, you have all kinds of elections where you don't have to have a majority of anybody to win. It allows for coalitions. It allows for smaller parties to break through. It allows for just different styles of voting that make a lot more sense than first past the post. So if we change the math, this is why I get into discussions with people that talk about, well, if you get into a third party, you're just going to handicap the Republicans and the Democrats are always going to win. Well, that's nonsense for two major reasons, okay? One, the Democrats are not united. That is a myth. There is no unity there either. As split as the Republicans are and as divided as they are, there is no unity among the Democrats either. Bernie Sanders voters couldn't stand Hillary Clinton. I know a bunch of them who did not go to vote for her. Okay, and right now they're getting castigated for, oh, see, you helped elect Trump. But that's not the case, because a bunch of Republicans abandoned Trump too. I mean, this is why we had the terribly low voter turnout that we had in 2016. These people were awful. Nobody wanted to vote for them. More options would have been terrific this time around, and the third party options that were there were not much better. But that's something we need to change. So if you introduce a third major party, it doesn't matter on the left or the right, you introduce a third vessel that can then be filled by the people who don't fit in either of the major two. And you wind up with a new balance. It finds its own balance. This is why you don't have in other countries, in the UK, for instance, where you got these different coalitions and they're different parties all over the place. You don't see absolute control for long periods of time by one party. You just don't see that. Now, you might see periods of upswing and downswing, but you don't see absolute control because there's different deals brokered, different issues arise that can form coalitions within governments. It's a changing dynamic all the time that lets different people have a voice and lets people compromise on things that matter to them. So we can have that same thing here. If you change the math here, you establish, say you get a third party on the right. Third party on the right, say it's the Constitution Party, becomes the third major party in American politics, okay? So what happens is the more right-leaning wing of the Republican Party doesn't have a reason to stay there with the moderates anymore. they're much more comfortable in the Constitution Party. So they move over, okay? They're going to move over en masse to the Constitution Party as soon as they realize it's viable and they can start winning. Okay? Well, the moderates in the middle now don't have a real party to defend. So one of two things can happen. They can either completely dry up and go away, which is not likely to happen with the money and the special interests that are already invested in them, or they can find a new constituency. And the way that they do that, they easily have done this. The major parties have done this many times over the years, is they shift ideologically to where the people are. So if you're in the moderate Republican Party and you know there's a bunch of uncomfortable moderates in the Democrat Party, you're going to shift left. So what happens is you end up with a far-right party, a moderate party, which is then the Republican Party, and a liberal party, which is then more liberal because the moderates have gone right. The same thing happens on the other side. If the Green Party becomes established as a third major party, Bernie's socialists go to the Green Party. The moderates stay in the middle. Republican moderates go to the Democrat Party because that is now the moderate party, and the Republican Party ends up being more right-facing. So this is a way that we can change the math just by adding another container. You add another structure that makes sense, and you change the math to where you can have that voice. Now, you're not going to win everything, and that's the nature of being in a representative republic. You're not going to win everything. We do have to compromise on things. People are going to win sometimes. You're going to lose sometimes. But right now, we don't even have that option. Right now, we don't even have that luxury. Right now, those of us that are constitutionalists and care about our freedom are being trampled by people who want checks, basically. People who want welfare checks. Essentially, you've got a situation where when the left is in charge with, Barack Obama, for instance, they want to use government as a bludgeon to just smack people who believe in traditional marriage, who believe in gun rights, who believe in free healthcare and free market association, who want immigration control. And they did that. I mean, a lot of the things that were passed either by Congress during Obama's time or more often by executive order were meant to punish people who disagreed. They're very just punitive in their nature and sweeping in their scope. Now that Trump is in office, and even before, if you want to go back further, when Bush was in office, you had the same thing. You had people on the right wanting to use government as a cudgel to beat people on the left over the head with it. That's just the nature of things. People want to grab this power and use it against someone on the other side. So since we're unlikely to redeem human nature to the point where that is no longer an inclination, the solution that remains is to decentralize that power. The solution that remains is to take the cudgel away. Devolve it to the states. Give people the freedom to pursue what they want within their own states, and if they don't like what their state is doing, to move or to have a voice and become an activist and change what's going on there. If you devolve that power, you have choices. As it is right now, the more that we centralize things, the more that we move things up, the more that we're all going to be stuck in a nation with policies that we don't recognize and we don't like without the power to really do anything about it, because your voice on the national level is very small. They can tell you what they want about every vote counts, and I know we've had some close elections, but nationally, your power is very small, your influence is very small, and you're stacked up against some major donors that can do a lot more than you can. But you know what? In your city, in your community, you're a giant. Your vote is huge. Your activism is huge. You shake hands with people, you can talk to people, you can earn trust, you can make change. That's where we need to start this. Let's start it back at the local level. Let's work our way up to the states. Let's work our way up from there to the federal government, and you will see a sweeping movement of federalism like you haven't seen in this country, and that is going to take care of a lot of the front page headline issues that we all talk about all the time, these irreconcilable differences that we spend all of our energy fighting about online. This is going to take care of a lot of them. You want to smoke weed? Go to Colorado. You want to smoke weed in Iowa? Work to pass that law. We're going to work through a lot of these things together that way. So I think that's a philosophical tenet that we need to adopt, and I think there needs to be a party to champion that, and I think the Federalist Party is the way to go. So I think that's the perspective that you're going to see from me on this. Is I believe federalism can be that one issue that changes everything here. And when we look at the Federalist Party, we look at a model that takes some cues from the Brexit vote, right? I mean, we're going to capitalize on people's need for independence, on people's desire for freedom and autonomy, and then migrate that to the state system here in America. It's going to work. It can change everything. So that's going to just about do it for us today. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. This being the very first of a shiny new show series. Try saying that 5 times fast. I decided to make it an introduction, but hey, have no fear. We're going to dive into more issues and arguments and worldviews and all sorts of crazy, fun, important stuff in upcoming episodes, and I hope you'll make your way back over to join in the action. Until then, be sure to follow us on Twitter at Right Moment Show and on Facebook, facebook.com/rightpolitic, where you can catch the latest show, check out articles, and join in the discussion. Or just hang out, troll people in the comments, pick fights, whatever. It's all good. I'm Joel Kurtinitis, and if you were waiting for the right moment, that was it.